In this video, I want to talk to you about how to go about healing emotionally if we're also maybe finding ourselves using exercise and the gym as a way to avoid the deeper emotional stuff. Maybe we feel we have a dysregulated nervous system and we're using the gym as a way to regulate ourselves, but then maybe not addressing the root cause of the dysregulated nervous system, which is often trauma. In a recent video of mine, I talked about emotional gym, and I talked about how strength training can be a really supportive thing to do if we're healing trauma, as it gets us in contact with our strength, our physical strength, and our awareness of our bodies. And through that, that can be translated into our resilience with our emotions and our ability to be aware of what's going on the inside, which is usually what has been wounded from trauma. And in that video, someone commented and asked a question that I really want to address in this video as it pertains to exercise addiction. And I'm just going to read that question and then I'm going to address the answer to it. So this person says, I'm wondering what you think about how some people use the gym and exercise as a way to avoid their own trauma. I grew up with a lot of self-loathing, which I would avoid by killing myself in the gym. I can really, really resonate with that. I'm wondering how a person might be able to make sure they're going about it in a healing way and contacting the emotional stuff instead of using the gym to avoid it. So this question, first and foremost, just want to thank that person for posing it because it is such an important thing to talk about. I think that this is something that is overlooked very much in the world at large, where we kind of see exercise as this healthy thing and it's, across the board healthy, but then we're not actually seeing maybe the nuances underneath it, that some people are actually using it as a way to cope with deeper seated stuff. So again, the question is, how do we go about using training or going to the gym or physical exercise and movement in a healing way, as well as being able to contact the emotional stuff that needs to be addressed in order to heal trauma and not avoiding it by doing those things, right? So in this video, I'm going to talk about what exercise addiction or compulsion might actually look like, how it shows up for people. And then I'm going to talk about why that might happen, the deeper seated underlying things that might be going on. And then I'm going to talk about how to go about it in a healing way so we can contact those emotional things while also having exercise as part of a balanced lifestyle as we're on this journey. So number one, and first and foremost, I just want to address where I'm coming from as I'm talking about this. I'm not a licensed psychologist, I want to say that, and I'm not a doctor either, and this isn't medical advice. I am, however, someone who studied addiction psychology in college and in grad school, and I also am someone who has gone through a lot of treatment for other addictions and has been in recovery. And then through that, from the other addictions that I was experiencing and suffering from, alcohol and drugs and food, how that translated then as I was healing, it actually transformed into exercise addiction. But underneath the surface, I wasn't taking care of the root cause of why the pattern was there in the first place. It just became from one pattern, which was pretty destructive, and then into another one, which was way more empowering and way more healthy. But still, the underlying core issue wasn't really being addressed in me because I didn't have enough awareness around trauma and the importance of somatic healing at the time. And throughout this time span, which goes, way back when into my teens, but then the last 12 years where I went through both education and my own healing journey, And then also working as a strength coach and eventually a somatic coach, this is where I learned so much on the journey of both balancing strength and exercise and kind of knowing how to balance that and not make it become like an addiction. So I personally feel so much more imbalance, and I don't have that same compulsive feel around my exercise and movement the way that I used to. So let's talk about what it can look like and how it actually looked like for me. If we feel like we are going to be really, really, really irritated or really, really frustrated, or we become really restless if we don't get our exercise in, like there's a certain degree that this is very understandable, normal if we have a routine of moving. But if we feel that something really bad's going to happen, or we feel really rigid about it, like if I don't get my exercise in today, then I can't handle it. I feel so much inner turmoil that I need to have that release through my exercise. And if I don't get it, then something bad's going to happen. That's often a telltale sign. It can also, then number 2, be the feeling that if I don't get this exercise in right now, then, like I said, something bad's going to happen. And I almost need to, or like this almost becomes more important than anything else in my life. Exercise becomes more important than my relationships. It becomes more important than work, maybe even sometimes. It just takes on a huge, huge, huge space in your life. And while again, there's a healthy aspect of that, but just being really cautious and aware of, is this actually taking away from my relationships and the other things in my life that are important to me in order for me to get that fix, essentially. And that's number 2. Number 3 is to see if that sense of needing to work out is actually coming from a sense of perfectionism and a sense of control. If I feel I have a part of myself that gets very controlling around my exercise, it has to be a certain way, it has to look like this, it has to look like that. And if I don't have that progression I'm looking for, if I don't get the workout in exactly the way that I need it to do, or need it to be, if my exercise is less than, if I exercise less than I said I was going to do, and I don't give it my all, and then something bad's gonna happen. Then I get down on myself, perhaps. Maybe I'm kind of punishing myself in the process. Like if I don't do it, then I punish myself, or I'll be really self-critical. And there might be just a lot of self-criticism that goes into that routine. And I think those are number 3. There's definitely several more, but I think that those were the ones that were really stuck out to me, where exercise became more important than other things in my life. And given I was also a personal trainer, I basically lived at the gym. So I got my workouts in between clients, but there was also this sense where I'd work out on the weekends for many, many hours and kind of had that as I need to do this, when really I could perhaps be taking care of, like doing more social things. I could have been more social, and maybe I should have as well. And again, this is kind of where self-awareness comes in. We kind of get really self-aware of where we might be doing it out of compulsion and a need and a fixation, rather than a healthy, balanced, I'm doing this as a way of my lifestyle, and it's not deterring from other aspects of myself or my life. And I have a healthy relationship with the part of myself that might be controlling this, or might be perfecting this, or needing things to be perfect. And then being very cautious of also if there is this sense of self-loathing that goes into it, where I'm punishing myself through my workouts. And this is where inner work is so important when it comes to doing this work, where we couple doing the inner work with also our exercise routine, and making sure that there is a balance there, not in order to control it or be more perfectionistic about our healing journey, because God knows we don't need that, but where we're just practicing it with awareness. And then I want to get into now talking about what the underlying factors of those things might be, why we might feel that self-loathing, or that perfectionism, or that need to control, or we need it as a way to maybe as a way to feel less lonely. And again, I want this and I keep saying it, but like there is a healthy aspect of this, right? Like there is an aspect of this that is really nourishing and important. But again, if we're doing it because we feel like there's something deeper going on that's wrong, or if we can't get it in, that there's something wrong that's going to happen, we kind of feel this rigidity and this like, oh my God, what's going to happen if I don't get my workout in, right? It's kind of the same thing you can feel like, at least I can relate to when it came to other addictions. It was that same energy around it, like nothing else mattered than doing this thing or getting my exercise in. And the underlying mechanisms of what's going on kind of more subconscious, unconscious level in our nervous system is that we might be doing this because we are potentially, using it as a way to regulate our emotions and kind of unconscious emotions, in the sense that we might have stored emotions in our bodies and our nervous systems from the past, from past trauma, that we might be sensing on some level, but they're not really there. They're not really, we're not fully aware of them. We're not actually feeling them to heal them. They might just be kind of lurking around. It might have been triggered throughout the day at work, or might have been triggered from things we see online. And then in order to kind of deal with that, we need to go to something like exercise in order to relieve that suffering, or that just feel a sense of relief from it. But then in that, we're not actually doing the emotional work that's needed, the release that's needed in order to address the root of it. And this is where, again, if we're able to have some sort of practice where we're also incorporating emotional and inner work, maybe we're seeing a therapist, we're seeing a somatic coach, or someone who is aware, someone who's trauma educated and aware, who can guide us through it so that we find ourselves feeling we're having balance, and as like that our health routine is supportive of also the healing work that we're doing, right? And that's just number one. Number two of what are the actual underlying reasons for this is we might feel a fear of our bodies, in the sense that we might feel emotional, like fear of feeling emotions, essentially. And feeling something really like painful or stressful might then, instead of going into it and turning our awareness inward, why am I feeling this anger right now? Or why am I feeling triggered right now? And being with what comes up inside of us, we might just immediately escape to something like the gym to take care of it. I remember so many times where I would feel triggered by things, and I would then rush to the gym in order to kind of work out the thing without actually addressing it at a deeper core level. Then feeling that relief I got from exercising, kind of going hard, having that high intensity workout, or lifting really heavy. And the relief of it, the dopamine release, the endorphins would just cover over the trigger, but they wouldn't actually address the core root of the trigger, which usually was something emotional, like an anger that needed to be addressed, or sadness that needed to be felt, right? And that's something that we often might see. People aren't necessarily that emotionally aware of themselves. We weren't taught how to be that. And the more emotions that we might have stored away because we learned that they were bad or wrong, or we were scared of them for some reason, usually this happens as we're children, then the more we might feel a need to avoid them through things like any type of substance, through scrolling on social media, through exercise, through whatever your drug of choice is, essentially. And there's then, like, just keep coming back to the balance between being able to feel our triggers and do the inner work necessary in order to turn our awareness inward, while also having a practice of exercise, as that is supportive to a physical body. But we need a practice for our emotional bodies, but then also for our physical bodies, and they also interconnect. So that was number two, I believe, where we talk about the fear of our emotions. That can be a driving factor for exercise, compulsion, or addiction. And then number three is this feeling of my sense of self-worth is attached to what my body looks like or how strong I am. If we're women or men, we might have a little bit difference there. Men might be more attached to like how big their muscles are or how strong they are. Women might be attached to, again, like the muscle mass in their bodies or how the shape of their bodies. And both of them, if we feel like we have created like an attachment to what we look like or how we perform, maybe we've received a lot of validation for it, for maybe we've been posting online the things that we've been doing, which feels really great to hear people kind of clapping at us and celebrating our, how, the effort we've put in. That feels really, really good. And then we might this is the sneaky thing, our identity or our sense of self-worth might become attached to that effort and to those results that we might find ourselves in the gym or getting from the gym. So it's the getting aware of like, do I actually feel like my sense of worthiness is attached to what I look like or how I perform? And then if I do, then start doing the deeper work around that, because likely there are parts of us then that don't feel that worthy or feel like they're not good enough. Other parts of us that aren't the performer or the fit body, right? And usually parts of us from the past. So it's just, again, comes back to self-awareness and being open to looking at this different parts of ourselves that relate to these things. Yeah. And especially if we've experienced things like emotional trauma, and that doesn't have to be like a big trauma either, but if we've felt things in high school or conditioning from school or from society that cause us to feel like our sense of self-worth comes from the way my body looks and how strong I am and how well I perform, then that's something that needs to be addressed, I believe, at a deeper level through healing work. And that is, I believe that was number 2. That was number 2. Number 3, the next one of how we know that or like what the deeper reasons for an exercise addiction might be. I mean, obviously it is often trauma, because we then have these deeper emotions that we're trying to avoid or trying to manage, not wanting to feel. And then we find the different ways in order to do that. But the one thing that I find is really, really common with this, and it was for me, and it's something I see with most or very, very many people, is a deeper sense of shame. Like the shame that we might have experienced from certain experiences from the past, where we feel shame around our emotions. We feel shame about our vulnerability. We feel shame about our sadness. We feel shame about our weakness. And we feel shame about like maybe our more awkward, weird side, or the part of ourselves that is emotional and sensitive. And then the shame then is used as or because we're trying to avoid feeling that, we might use things like the gym to compensate for that shame. And then through that, the gym just becomes so big, or training becomes so big and so important, that because we're so scared of feeling and going into that shame and where that shame might come from. The identity that we feel from the gym, the strength and the body we might have built, that becomes like the biggest, most important thing. And then anything else that would take away from that feels really threatening. So we have to keep going, and we feel very attached to continuing on to get the results and to keep getting maybe validation and all the different things, right? I know that this can be kind of triggering to hear, and I'm probably not also addressing every single aspect of this, but I'm just saying what I'm seeing and also what I've experienced for myself. So I think that was number 3, and just looking at perhaps the shame that we might be avoiding feeling through going to the gym. This is also a very common thing when it comes to addiction to alcohol, or addiction to drugs, or addiction to gambling, or addiction to whatever it might be, where we feel a deeper sense of shame somewhere that we're trying to avoid feeling and compensating for through the addictive pattern. So just awareness around that. And then I'm going to talk about how to actually work with these things, because as the person mentioned in the comments, like the sense of self-worth or self-loathing that we might have felt, that actually I'm going to couple that in with the shame, because self-loathing also comes from self-criticism, comes from a feeling of shame. because we're self-criticizing the parts of ourselves that we feel ashamed about. And then that self-loathing or that criticism can become big, and we will then become like the inner drill sergeant inside of us that starts telling us that what we're doing is not good enough and needs to be better. And that can just be, seen through the lens of going to the gym, for example, or training in whatever capacity that we do that in. So that's important to address. And so how do we go about healing, right? Like, how do we go about contacting these deeper, more vulnerable, sensitive parts of ourselves and looking at the parts of ourselves that are perfectionistic, controlling, self-loathing maybe, and doing the inner work while also balancing that out with having a healthy lifestyle, right? So one thing that I often do with people, if they feel that they have been in that compulsive state and they've been really in the I have to exercise, and they feel that sense of rigidity and compulsion around it rather than a sense of relaxation and I'm okay if I don't work out today. I'm okay if I don't work out tomorrow. I know and I trust that I will get back into it because this is an important part of my lifestyle and it's an important part of my future, right? But there isn't this fear or this dysregulation underneath it, driving it. So one thing I often recommend is actually taking a break from exercise, especially if it's been high intensity exercise, taking a break for a month and focusing instead on somatic exercises and intuitive movement. So this will allow our bodies to start relaxing more and for our nervous system to start regulating and finding more safety in other different types of movements that are more expressive on an emotional level, first and foremost, but also more slow and more inner aware and more interoceptive, as we call it, where we're becoming aware of our inner sensations that might be more quiet, might be more silent than if we just blast past them and do like a high intensity exercise, which then, that can be, when we go into high intensity exercise, that might be triggering our cortisol, might be triggering our adrenaline, which makes actually our nervous system go more into a sympathetic state. And what we're doing when we're healing, we actually want to help our nervous system feel more calm and regulated in a more parasympathetic nervous system state, which is safety, which is play, which is even kind of sensuality and being kind of feeling safe to be without having that inner sense of heightened stimulus of sympathetic activation. So finding the practices and the movement that allow us to contact that more regulated, safe place while also creating a space for the emotional stuff to come up. It is through when our nervous system feels more safe to show the deeper parts of ourselves, the emotions that might have been repressed, that is where we can heal. If we're constantly unsympathetic and going, doing, our nervous systems aren't going to be like, okay, well, we're not going to start actually opening up to these deeper things because we don't feel safe to do so. We're constantly in survival. So how can we feel like the body gets to heal? And if we're constantly in survival, we need to feel safe and rested in order to heal. And that goes the same, that's both physical, but that's also emotional. So having some time in the beginning to just relax and do more somatic exercises and do somatic mobility perhaps, and intuitive movement based on, every individual is slightly different. Maybe calming down to like more slow, aware strength training that isn't super heavy, but it's where we're really feeling the muscles of our body. Maybe we're increasing our mobility through it. That is also where the fascia of our bodies are going to be able to release the things that they might have stored as well. But again, not so much high intensity, go more into this slower, more aware, intuitive, somatic movement. I think that after that, when we do that, coupled with things like inner work, having a therapist, seeing a coach, having a support system, a women's group, a men's group, where we can contact these deeper parts of ourselves, do the shadow work that often is required, that is where we can both feel supported to go deeper while also finding a balance with our lifestyle and our exercise routines. So highly, highly suggest finding a way to both let the body slow down so that the emotional stuff can feel safe to come up, coupling it in with inner work and maybe parts work, which is something that I do a lot in my coaching, where we look at inner parts of ourselves that might be more in a protective, sympathetic response, and kind of getting to know why they're there in the first place. This can look like a perfectionist or controller or the doer. And what's underneath that? What's the vulnerability it might be protecting, so that that can feel safe to come up and to be healed. So I think that that's all I'm going to leave it with right now. Let your body know that your body needs rest in order to heal, and it needs space in order to heal. But so let your body first kind of redial and recalibrate to safety through different somatic exercises, and resting and not going, doing, letting yourself have a period of getting to become more inner aware of what's going on inside of yourself. And then after that period of time, then you can start adding more intensity and adding more intensity in a mindful way that isn't just a compulsive, I need to get this hit and this release right now, but I'm doing it because it's I know that it's good for my cardiovascular system, it's good for my future, but just like having this awareness that, am I doing this because I'm trying to avoid something, escape something inside of myself, or am I doing it because it's genuinely feels really, really good and nourishing, and it's an important part of my lifestyle? Just really getting aware of those nuances within ourselves and allowing our bodies to rest so that it can heal, so the deeper emotional things can come up and we can be with and practice that inner compassion and awareness so that we can feel more whole and healthy as who we truly are, every single part of ourselves, not just the parts of ourselves that we think are the best one, the parts of ourselves that are the performers, the fit, the, whatever it might be for us. So if you're curious about work together at all, I'll drop my information below. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them below. I love addressing them in my videos. So if you have anything, please feel free to drop them below. And I also respond to all my comments. So feel free to say anything that you feel like saying. And I hope that you take so much care on your own journey.